Before we get into this video, how is everybody morning, afternoon, and night going where y'all from? Cause about to check out Mr. Ballin, Canada's Buffalo Bill, and the most disturbing blog I ever read. So let's get into the video.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please take the like button out on a fancy scuba diving trip, but replace the air in their tanks with helium. Also, please subscribe to our channel. On the evening of March 27, 2013, a 45-year-old doctor named Marcelo Gurruchaga dug through a supply cabinet in the clinic that he owned in southeastern Spain. He grabbed an IV needle, anesthetic drugs, and a scalpel, and then he walked to the operating room in the back of the clinic, where his patient was already lying on the table. And as Marcelo looked at his patient, he couldn't help but feel incredibly anxious. This was easily going to be the most important and most dangerous surgery he had ever done. In fact, this surgery was illegal, and one wrong move here could not only harm his patient, but could also destroy his life. I mean, he could lose his medical license, he could be arrested. I mean, this was a very high-stakes operation. But Marcelo felt like he really had no choice here, because he had this huge problem going on in his personal life, and he had been promised that if he did this surgery successfully, that problem would be solved. His hands shook as he gave his patient the IV, and then he began administering the anesthetic drugs. Soon, his patient was unconscious. And then, after a steadying breath, Marcelo picked up the scalpel and then made his first incision. A little over a week later, on April 5th, 2013, a very disheveled and distraught Marcelo walked into a local police station carrying a small cardboard box. Once he was inside, he told the clerk that he had to speak to an officer because he needed to make a confession. A moment later, a detective came out, and right away Marcelo began crying, and he told this detective this unbelievable story. And as he did, the detective just felt really bad for Marcelo. I mean, this story was so tragic, so awful. But as Marcelo went along and the details of the story began kind of going all over the place, the detective went from feeling empathy to confusion to full-blown suspicion of Marcelo. Something was off here. And so at some point, when Marcelo finally went quiet and he was just standing there holding this box,
Yeah, I want to know what's inside the box. Shoot, what's inside
the detective
box?
looked at him and said, "Hey, what's in that box?" And when Marcelo reached down and slowly opened it up, the detective immediately knew 2 things. 1, Marcelo was definitely lying. And 2, this whole situation was far more serious than this detective had imagined. It would turn out the big personal problem that Marcelo was experiencing, that supposedly this high-stakes illegal surgery was going to alleviate, had to do with his wife, Rosa. Rosa was deeply unhappy, specifically about her weight. She felt like she was overweight. And so she had given her husband, Marcelo, the doctor, an ultimatum. She said, "You need to perform a weight loss surgery on me, or I'm going to take my own life." And Marcelo knew this was no idle threat, because his wife, Rosa, had previously attempted to end her life before. And so ultimately, Marcelo agrees to do this illegal operation. But this operation was illegal not because Marcelo was not like a weight loss doctor. No, it was illegal because Marcelo was an animal doctor. He was a veterinarian, not a human doctor. And so
Wait a minute. He ain't no way.
Marcelo really had no idea how to perform this weight loss surgery. And so as soon as he made that first incision on his wife, the surgery went completely sideways and Rosa died on the operating table. And when that happened,
Whoa.
Marcelo panicked and immediately dismembered his wife's body and cremated her in an attempt to...
Whoa. Hey.
cover up what he had just done. However, over the next week, Marcelo felt so guilty about what he did that he ultimately went to the police and he confessed. However, at first, during this confession, Marcelo told the detective that his wife had died because she had taken her own life. And when the detective began asking probing questions about how she died exactly and when this happened, he began getting answers that didn't really make any sense, and so ultimately he asked Marcelo to please show him what's inside of that box he's carrying. So Marcelo opened it up, revealing Rosa's ashes. And that told the detective that Marcelo had to be lying because he's thinking, wait a minute, if your wife took her own life a week ago, why did Marcelo immediately cremate her and hide the fact that she had been dead for a whole week? It didn't add up. Ultimately, Marcelo would be charged with his wife's murder, but he would spend 4 years in prison awaiting trial. And then when he went to trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison.
Oh, God. Killed his own wife.
Are you really the last person to find out about this Skip Ads Forever button? This is Pi, and if it sounds familiar to you, it's probably because...
Hey football fans, Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner, so now is the time to get in on the action with my partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook. There is an insane deal right now where DraftKings is giving new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. So here's your chance to make every...
The woman in a wickedy dress.
On a late winter afternoon in 1985, a Canadian border security guard stood at the border between New York State and Ontario, Canada. And as he looked out at the dozens of cars lined up at his checkpoint, he felt an enormous amount of responsibility. Because for him, working at border security was not just about checking people's passports. It was also about making sure dangerous criminals from the United States did not flee their country and enter Canada. And today, there was one particular dangerous criminal from the United States that this guard was on high alert for. A 30-year-old man named Alex Mangle. A few days earlier, Alex Mangle had been stopped by a police officer near New York City. And during this traffic stop, Alex had somehow taken the police officer's gun and shot the officer in the head, killing them, and then Alex had fled, and he was still on the run. And so now law enforcement was concerned that because New York was only 6 hours from the Canadian border, that it was very possible that Alex might try to flee into Canada to escape persecution. And so US and Canadian law enforcement and border security were on the lookout for Alex Mangle. And he was this 30-year-old white man with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And so all day long, that Canadian border security guard looked very closely at every person who came through his checkpoint to see if they were Alex Mangle. He would see a family on their way to visit relatives in Canada. He would see a couple on their honeymoon. He would see a man with a car full of camping supplies and a middle-aged woman traveling alone and all these different people from all walks of life, but none of them looked anything like Alex Mangle. And so by the end of his shift, after checking dozens and dozens of cars and looking at every person, he felt certain that Alex Mangle had not slipped through his checkpoint. And so he clocked out and he went home. A few days later, on March 2nd, a police officer was patrolling this parking lot right outside of a shopping mall in Ontario, Canada, which was located about an hour and a half away from the border. And during his patrol, at some point, he noticed there was this one car, a white Toyota, that had been loitering in the area for quite a while. And so he decided to drive over and see what was going on. And when he got there, he looked inside the vehicle and he saw someone sitting on the passenger seat. And he was a white man, probably in his 30s, with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And this officer immediately recognized this guy as being the wanted criminal, Alex Mangle. And so the officer immediately called for backup, and then he parked his car, got out, and approached the white Toyota where this guy was sitting with his gun drawn. And as the officer approached the passenger side door, the man inside turned, noticed the officer, jumped into the driver's seat, fired up the car, and the Toyota sped out of the parking lot. And so the officer, he jumps back in his cruiser and he takes off after him. And before long, it was like the entirety of the police force in Toronto was a part of this high-speed chase to catch this guy. And eventually they funneled the car into a dead-end street, and the white Toyota crashed into a stop sign, and then the man inside with the mustache and the thinning brown hair pops out, and immediately everybody sees, yep, that's Alex Mangle. He didn't put up a fight at that point. He was taken into custody. However, despite how relieved law enforcement was to have this cop killer in custody, they realized they didn't understand something. How was it that Alex Mangle got past border security and got into Canada. Everybody was on high alert looking for him. What happened? And so police were baffled until they searched that white Toyota Alex had been driving. On the night that Alex shot and killed that police officer near New York City, he immediately fled to this wooded area and hid out overnight. And then the next day, when he got up, he was walking around and he happened to pass by this commercial building. And as he was looking at it, he saw this middle-aged woman, whose name was Beverly Capone, come out of the building and make her way towards her car, and she was all alone. And so Alex walked up to her and abducted her at gunpoint, and then he drove her to this cabin out in the woods that he knew would be totally isolated, no one was there. And once they got there, he murdered her, and then once she was dead, he stole her clothes and put it on, and also cut off her face and her scalp and put those on as well. He was literally wearing her skin and hair.
Wait a minute. Peter real Leatherface? So he tried to change his identity. Ain't no way.
And he hopped in that white Toyota and he drove up to the Canadian border, and amazingly, he got through the checkpoint into Canada without anybody noticing. It would turn out that Canadian border security guard, who all day was checking for Alex Mengel, did actually see Alex Mengel. He just didn't recognize him because Alex Mengel was wearing Beverly Capone's face, hair, and clothes. And so he thought he was just a middle-aged woman traveling alone, and he let him on through. And so police would figure this whole thing out when they searched that white Toyota, because they would find lying on the floorboard was Beverly's dress, scalp, and face. Alex was deported back to the US. However, before he could stand trial, he attempted to escape a prison transport and in the process got shot to death by police. However, that was not the end of Alex's story. Following his death, officers continued to investigate him and also his property, and at some point during a search of his property, they would discover all these photos of unidentified women, along with these maps where these very isolated places in New York and Pennsylvania were circled, and nobody knows what they mean. Now, police have not conclusively linked Alex to any other murders, but he does remain a suspect in several cases, and in fact, many investigators believe Alex was actually a serial killer. However, we'll probably never know how many people Alex actually killed because he took all of his secrets to the grave.
Damn.
Starting today, anyone can monetize with ads as part of the all-new Beehive ad network.
Blog about it. Number 1.
At 5 p.m. on May 12, 2005, an 18-year-old college student named Simon Eng sat inside of his bedroom in the apartment he shared with his sister Sharon in New York City. Simon was supposed to be doing homework, but instead, he was doing something he loved, which was blogging. Simon would write on his blog just about every single day, and he typically wrote about his self-improvement journey he was on. Not because he thought lots of people were going to read it and be inspired by it, but because he kind of wanted to chronicle his journey so that in the future, when he was the best version of himself, he could look back and sort of see how far he had come, to see the progress he made. But on this particular day, Simon was not writing about self-improvement. Instead, he was blogging about something that was totally unusual for him. In fact, he had never written anything like this on his blog ever before. But Simon knew basically nobody read his blog, and so he wasn't really that concerned about writing something so off topic. And so at about 5:05 p.m., when he was done with this very strange blog post, he didn't think twice. He just hit post. 5 hours later, at about 10 p.m., an NYPD detective, along with some other police officers and first responders, arrived at Simon and Sharon's apartment. They went inside and went straight to Simon's bedroom, and there they would find Simon. He was laying perfectly still on the ground, his feet were bound by duct tape, and he was covered in stab wounds. They rushed up to him to feel for a pulse, but very quickly they discovered he was dead. And then before they could even process what had happened here, they heard moaning coming from the other bedroom across the hall. And so they rushed in there, and they would discover Simon's sister, Sharon. She also was covered in stab wounds and laying on the ground, but she was still alive. And so they tried to rush her to the hospital to try to save her life, but in transit, she would die. And she would also die before she could actually tell authorities what happened to her and her brother. For the next 3 days, investigators could not make sense of Simon and Sharon's murders. But then a detective discovered Simon's blog, and they found his final entry. And it was that very unusual post that Simon did that was not anything to do with his self-improvement journey. Well, it would turn out that last post broke the case wide open. Right before Simon was killed, he wrote in his blog about what was actually happening in his apartment, like in real time, literally what he was seeing and hearing. Here is a screenshot of that blog post. It says, quote, "Today has been weird. At 3, some guy ringed the bell. It was my sister's former boyfriend. He is still here right now. Hopefully, he will leave soon." Sharon's former boyfriend was a man named Jin Chung Lin. And a year earlier, he and Sharon had gone through a really rocky breakup. Now, Sharon had moved on and kind of gotten over the breakup, but Jin hadn't. He was still furious about the way things ended. And so he ultimately went to Sharon and Simon's apartment to get revenge. And his revenge was murdering the brother and sister. When police confronted Jin with information from Simon's blog post, he immediately confessed to the murders. Jin was tried and found guilty of the murders and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Today, Simon's blog is actually still available online, so you can go and see his final post. However, what you'll really see if you go to his blog is the thousands and thousands of comments from people all around the world hoping that Simon and Sharon rest in peace. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of today's episode, and also remember, we have hundreds more videos for you to binge right now. But if you want a recommendation